So, Pappy, I want to start with a real question, not a hypothetical one. If something went wrong right now, let's say a fire alarm, a medical emergency, or an evacuation, what would kids in most homes actually do in the first minute?
In most homes, Jason, I think they'd be freezing. They wouldn't know what to do. But it's not because they're incapable. It's because no one ever showed them what comes next.
Yeah, and that gap between surprise and next step is where panic lives.
Exactly. And it's also where preparedness makes the biggest difference. So stay tuned to see how we can fix that.
You're listening to DisasterClass Podcast by Instinct Ready Emergency Management. Hello, everyone. You are listening to DisasterClass, the podcast by Instinct Ready Emergency Management that's dedicated to helping you educate, prepare, and equip yourself for life's disruptions. I'm Jason Perez, and with me is Jason Martin, a.k.a. Pappy.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So today's episode is built around a new resource that we're developing, an emergency preparedness checklist for kids, an age-based framework designed to help families prepare children without fear. And before we dive in, one important note is, right, I'm not a parent, I don't have kids, but Pappy, you are, and your kids are actually full grown now.
They are. My youngest is 18, so they're full grown. But I've also got a 4-year-old granddaughter, so this is going to help her too.
Yeah,
and that's why I like this conversation. I'm not guessing with any of this. I've lived through it. I've gone through all of these stages we're going to talk about, and I've seen what works and what doesn't, what skills stuck, and what mattered most years later.
and that hindsight matters because this episode isn't about turning kids into responders. It's about raising kids who are calm, confident, and capable when something unexpected happens.
That's right, because preparedness isn't a moment, it's progression.
So let's start where most people think preparedness is impossible. Let's talk about toddlers, right? Ages 2 to 4. When we think about that age group, is preparedness even realistic at that age?
It really is, Jason, because again, we're not talking about reacting, we're responding. So as long as you don't expect somebody to be reasonable in their actions, because we know toddlers aren't reasonable, and they don't understand emergencies, but they understand patterns.
Very good. Yeah. So developmentally, kids in this age range are often described as pre-operational, right? Learning through imitation, repetition, and simple cause and effect, not abstract logic. So what does preparedness actually look like with a toddler?
So it's simple. It's not overcomplicated, really. It's things like stay close. We teach our young ones to stay close, especially, we already do it when we're at the store or out in public. Stay close. But then there's recognizing caregivers. Who are those people that we can trust? First responders, police, paramedics, firefighters. Those are the people that we want to help them build their trust in. But also following just simple one-step directions. And if we can do that, that's a great start.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the checklist reflects, right? Holding hands, practicing calm exits, and including some comfort items.
Yeah, those are huge. Preparedness isn't education here. It's just familiarity. They've got to be comfortable with these things and feel that comfort because that's what they need in these times.
So now let's talk about preschool and early elementary, so ages 5 to 7. What changes cognitively at this age?
So as we watch our kids as they're growing up, they become more aware of the things that are around them. They're able to, people that they see on a regular basis or activities that they're engaged in. And so especially this is taught at school. So recognizing things now that aren't normal, we're able to start helping them see these things.
Yeah, so now they can label information, right? Names, alarms, helpers. But even at this age, they're still thinking very literally.
Yeah, very much so. Like with my granddaughter, she's just right before this age. She's pushing up on it, and she recognizes these things. So getting them to know their name, they're recognizing their name. Um, and sometimes that's difficult with, some people have some really difficult names, and my granddaughter's not different on that. But then recognizing alarms. From an early age, my kids knew what the fire alarm meant. Knowing when to ask for help. If they're in a situation where they don't know what to do, knowing that they don't have to just panic, but to go to those trusted individuals, trusted sources, identifying them, and then asking for help. So that's this age bracket, and they're really able, if you help them, they're really able to thrive here.
And there are well documented cases of kids in this age bracket calling 911 during a
Yeah.
parent's medical emergency,
Yeah.
and staying on the line until help arrives. Numerous documented cases of kids able to do that. So, what an important thing that is.
Yeah. And so we don't want to overcomplicate it for our kids, teach them these things, and they don't need explanations on everything. And they don't need to have permission to speak up. They want to be able to speak up and ask these questions. So encourage that openness with your kids.
So, quick pause here because this checklist isn't meant to stand alone.
Right. It's a mindset.
And everything we're talking about today, calm practice, age appropriate skills, confidence over fear, right? This is the foundation of our Capable Community course series.
Capable means knowing what to do, but also staying grounded during that point.
The courses that we're developing help households and communities build preparedness step by step. So if you're interested in the Capable Community course series and you want to bring a course near you, email us at disasterclass@instinctready.com. So now let's get back to it. So let's talk about older elementary, right? So ages 8 through 11. This is where preparedness starts paying some dividends.
It does. And at this age, kids are wanting responsibility. They're always asking for this and asking for that. And as parents, responsible parents are teaching them that responsibility. And it helps them because then they become and they feel capable. They're confident of what their abilities are and what we're teaching them.
And at this point, they can follow multi-step instructions. They can apply learned rules under stress. And one of my absolute favorite examples of why preparedness education works is with the example of Tilly Smith. So if you don't remember this story, this was back in December of 2004. A massive undersea earthquake triggered the Indian Ocean tsunami, killing more than 230,000 people across 14 countries. There was no tsunami warning system at that time. But on this beach in Thailand, the ocean started suddenly pulling back as it does with tsunamis. And among the tourists was a 10-year-old British girl named Tilly Smith. Now, just 2 weeks earlier, she had learned about tsunamis in geography class. And when she noticed the exposed ocean floor, the fish flopping on the sand, and the water behaving strangely, while adults were curious, Tilly became alarmed. She recognized the signs. In fact, at that time, she told her parents, I think it's going to be a tsunami. And so while the adults were kind of like, well, what's going on here? She explained what she learned in school, that the sea pulling back was a warning sign and people needed to get away from the beach. So her parents alerted the hotel staff, the beach was cleared, and because the beach was evacuated, no one there was killed. So what a wonderful and amazing example. One of my favorite stories of showing how even at a young age, our children can really recognize and make a difference.
100%. I love this example too because it really showed too that her parents listened to her, and she explained what she had learned at school, and her parents believed her. They had that trust in her abilities. So kudos to her and her parents, the hotel staff also for responding as well. So it helps us see that confidence is built through preparation, not panic.
So now let's move on to middle school, right? So ages 12 to 14. This is kind of a turning point for many kids. So what happens here?
Ah, yes, middle school. So, you know, our kids are they're starting to develop themselves, who they really, really are. So at this point, judgment matters. And as we, you know, they're not looking at rules necessarily. They're taking what they've learned and what they've assimilated into their minds and their brains, and they're acting on that judgment call, that gut feeling, if you will.
Yeah. So executive function is still developing, but kids at this age, interestingly, can stay task focused with practice. And so there's an amazing example. An 11-year-old in Wisconsin followed dispatcher guided CPR instructions until responders arrived. So even at that age, 11 years old, was able to perform CPR at the prompting of a dispatcher.
Right. And in that case, training won. They listened. And there's so many more cases of younger ones giving the Heimlich maneuver or CPR or whatever it may be. So train, train, train. It wins every time because panic doesn't take over.
Yeah. So quick pause. We're talking about school age, right? So especially for educators and school leaders listening, this is for you.
Because preparedness doesn't just live at home, it lives in schools as well.
Yeah, and most schools have what they call what we call an emergency operations plan, but that doesn't always mean that it's realistic or developmentally appropriate. And unfortunately, some schools have gotten into the habit of just kind of checking a box when it comes to their plans.
They do. Yeah, and that's sad. And in these cases, a kindergarten response plan shouldn't look like it's designed for high schoolers. It's just not going to work. The kids aren't going to understand.
And so that's where Instinct Ready's EOP assessment service comes in. We help schools evaluate their existing emergency operation plan to see if it's actually functional, if it meets the best standards and best practices, and that their staff and students can actually follow it.
And that's right, Jason. It's a great service, and we want to get beyond the compliance mindset because that's where most people live. It's the minimum standards. That's all we have to do is we have to be compliant. But just with our kids, it's confidence in what we have written down, and you go through the drills and you put it to practice.
So, if you want to learn more about our emergency operation plan assessment service, you can visit instinctready.com or just send us an email at disasterclass@instinctready.com. All right. So, Pappy, now let's move into teens, right?
Oh
Ages
boy.
15 to 18. How much responsibility is appropriate?
More than people really think. Because if, as we've talked, teaching our kids from that toddler age on up, we've already got the foundation built. So there's something to build on. And just like as you're building your house, you pour that foundation, you've got the walls up, now you're getting the roof on, and you're starting to do all the finish work inside. That's that's where we're at with our older teens.
Yeah. And and that's true because teens can reason abstractly, they can adapt under pressure even though their impulse control systems are still maturing.
Yeah. And it's again going back to that confidence in what they've been taught. They have a purpose. And when you have purpose, it drives your action and you're looking forward to that end result.
So now let's finish up with emotional preparedness. What does that look like?
You know, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter who it is. We're all going to have that little bit of trauma with some sort of disaster, some emergency. There's always a little bit. But if we've prepared ourselves, and you can't completely prepare yourself emotionally because you don't know how you're going to respond. But as you go through these things, you do drills, fire escapes from the house. They do fire escapes and fire drills at school. When I was in school many decades ago, we had bomb threats. So we had the same kind of thing. They have active shooter drills at school and various things. So all these things, we want to do that here at home because it's not skill that really matters. Fear takes over. So doing these drills, normalizing fear, practicing breathing, it helps control our minds and our bodies during these things so that the emotional trauma afterwards is minimalized.
Pappy, one thing you said earlier about kind of laying the foundation, and really for this to be most effective, starting at an early age. If we build, I always like to say that preparedness is a mindset. It's not just something you do. It's not checking a box. It's a mindset. And if you can start building this preparedness, this readiness mindset at a young age, even as toddlers, then as they get older, that mindset's going to stick with them. And then, it's not just about emergencies. It's not just about disasters or medical emergencies or anything like that.
Daily life.
It helps with life. And so I've often talked about developing a risk mindset, and that can play into so many different things, right? And decisions you make in life and how you navigate different areas, whether it's education, relationships, work, all of that risk mindset really plays in all aspects of life. So starting them out early is going to help them as they get older.
Yeah. And I'm going to use a recent example. I've mentioned before on the podcast, I've got 4 kids. My oldest she's pushing 30. My youngest is just shy of 19. So they're all out in the working world. My youngest daughter, who's 20, at work a few months ago, one of her coworkers is, I think she was in her early 70s. She was in the break room and started choking. Mm. And nobody noticed it until it was too late. She had collapsed. She had turned blue. Nobody knew what to do. They're on the phone with 911. Paramedics get there. She'd been without oxygen for 5 to 10 minutes. Not a wonderful situation. My daughter wasn't in the room when this all started, but she ended up in the room. And unfortunately, after a week of being on life support and everything, her family took her off of that, and unfortunately she passed, which is traumatic, especially for all of her coworkers and her, my daughter. And seeing something like that, some people already deal with emotional mental health struggles. And so having something like this happen to them real life, where they're seeing these things happen, that's what you're talking about everyday life, because these things do happen. So when we help our kids and they get older and it becomes a way of life, the mindset, they're able to cope with these trials, these things as they experience life. Unfortunately, for my daughter's coworker, nobody knew what to do. And so that's why not just schools, but businesses need to take action so they can train their employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was an awesome discussion. Before we conclude this episode of Disaster Class, we just want to remind you, please make sure you like, subscribe, leave us a rating, comment on what you thought, give us that thumbs up. Let us know about something you learned or appreciated from this episode. And as always, if you have a question, preparedness tip, disaster story to share, send us an email at disasterclass@instinctready.com or drop us a message on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Disaster Class. Stay educated.
Stay prepared.
Stay equipped.
Class is dismissed. Let's hit the playground. This episode was hosted by Jason Perez and Jason Martin. Disaster Class is directed, produced, and edited by Jason Perez. Copyright 2026, Instinct Ready Incorporated, all rights reserved.